Today we're going to be delving into Puerto Rico's rich history of economic development with Tito Colorado. Don't go away.
Live from San Juan, Puerto Rico, this is the Puerto Rico Business Broadcast. Now, here's your host, Daven Michaels.
Today we're talking about one of my favorite things, Puerto Rico's amazing economic development programs, and we're going to learn a lot today. We're going to go back in time. We've got history with Tito Colorado, and Tito is the former Secretary of Economic Development to Puerto Rico, but so many more other things. You've held many positions, and we're going to talk about that in just a sec. But first of all, tell us your Puerto Rico story, Tito.
Well, my Puerto Rico story didn't start in Puerto Rico.
Where did it start?
Because my parents were married in Cuba.
Cuba.
They're both from Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. But then they went to New York, and I was born in New York.
Okay.
So I spent my very early years, first 2 years in New York, then the second 2 years in Washington, D.C., where my father was working for the Department of State of Washington. In Washington. And then we came to Puerto Rico when I was 4 years old.
Okay.
My father came as dean of the social science school, and I studied at the elementary and the junior and high school of the University of Puerto Rico. And my father was as dean of social science, the first dean of social science. He brought to Puerto Rico a lot of very interesting people from all over the world, but especially from the civil war in Spain. Many exiles came to Puerto Rico. And so I had a very rich life experience when I was young, and I continued to do that, for all my years in my life, really. I went to school at the university, high school, as I said before. Then I went to Boston University, studied industrial engineering. Then I came to the University of Puerto Rico, studied law. That's where I met Delia, my wife. And then I went to Harvard Law to study my master's degree in law. And I was granted later on an honorary degree also from the Ana Jimenez University.
Very nice, very nice. And so you were Puerto Rico's Secretary of Economic Development, what years?
I was from 1985 to 1989, 5 years.
Okay.
Five full years.
And you also served several roles in government. You were
but I continued. You see, I was in charge of what we call the Caribbean Basin Initiative, which we did together with the United States. It was probably one of the most important events in the life of economic life of Puerto Rico. And then I went to Secretary of State, but I continued to be in charge of that program. Mm-hmm. Then I went Secretary of State from 90, really, the full year, and 91. And then year 92, I was in Washington as a resident commissioner of Puerto Rico in Washington. And I continued to be in charge of the economic development program of the Caribbean development, which was really something very, very important.
And when you were in Washington, what was your role in Washington?
Well, I was in the
your duties
in the Congress, Congress, and I was in two of the committees that I thought were important for Puerto Rico. One was the Foreign Relations Committee, and the other was the Internal Committee, which was in charge of the issues pertaining to the United States. Inside the United States, and as Puerto Rico was part of the United States, I still is part of the United States, I thought it was important for me to be also in that committee.
Sure. And so was it your regime, if you will, that ushered in 931?
Yeah, well, when I started in Fomento in 1966, and at that time I had been granted a scholarship to go to Harvard to study tax laws so that I could help in the tax exemption program that Puerto Rico had.
And did that program already exist or not yet?
Already existed. That program started in 1948.
Okay.
Governor Muñoz Marin was the governor at that time. He had come into power in 1940, but he was not the governor until 1952. In 48, he was the leader. and he worked with Teodoro Moscoso, who was the person who developed what we call Operation Bootstrap,
Right.
which really started as such, as legislation in 1948. And in 1948, we had the first tax exemption law in Puerto Rico, which granted 10 years of full tax exemption to companies coming to Puerto Rico and manufacturing products in Puerto Rico.
All right, so I want to break down 931, but let's back up for a second and talk about Bootstrap. So not everybody knows about Operation Bootstrap and the impact that it had on Puerto Rico. So can you explain Operation Bootstrap?
Yes, well, Puerto Rico in the 40s was, really one of the poorest areas in the world.
Really?
I wouldn't say within the United States. I would say in the world.
Was this after sugar or during sugar?
No, this was during sugar.
Okay.
During sugar. Before, but the thing is that before 1940, and when the Americans came to Puerto Rico at the early, last of the 19th century, we had three agricultural products which were important, which were coffee, tobacco, and sugar.
Okay.
When the Americans came in, that was changed basically to sugar.
Okay.
Why? Because there was a much better
US.
market for sugar in the world,
Okay.
and Puerto Rico being part of the United States, it was, we could take our products to the mainland without any problems. So that was number one, and we had a good number of large U.S. companies which owned the manufacturers or were manufacturing sugar in Puerto Rico.
And if Puerto Rico was so poor at the time, why did the U.S. want Puerto Rico?
Well, Puerto Rico was part of the United States, since 1898. But it was an important place in the Caribbean, and I would say in the hemisphere, as to be able to take watch and look at it was the entrance
Right.
to all of the Americas,
Right.
and that's why it was important militarily to
yeah.
everyone, especially to the United States. And one of the reasons that Roosevelt later on took Roosevelt Roads, and that's why it's called Roosevelt Roads. It was because he thought that was the best place to be able to, keep track of what was happening, and in case of an attack, being able to do something.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so we're going to go down the rabbit hole with Operation Bootstrap. In just a moment, we'll be right back with Tito Colorado right after this. Just a short interruption to let you know it's time to book your ticket for the San Juan Social Club Cruise. This annual cruise is a one-of-a-kind vacation specially curated for residents of Puerto Rico and people that are interested in Puerto Rico. It's for people looking to network, make friends, and learn about all the resources and opportunities Puerto Rico has to offer. I promise you, this week-long voyage is truly an unforgettable experience. Last year, we had 238 high-level founder entrepreneur cruisers. We have over 400 booked for the next one. The cruise includes world-class speakers, mastermind sessions, deal-making, off-boat adventures, themed parties, and more. Over 100 million in deals were done between our cruisers, friendships made, tens of thousands of dollars raised for impact projects on the island, and fun. For a limited time, it's just a few $100s to lock in your reservation that comes with a whopping onboard credit. To get all the details and join us for the next San Juan Social Club Cruise, go to sanjuansocialcruise.com. That's sanjuansocialcruise.com. As a business owner, the last thing I want to be doing is payroll. Not only do I not want to be doing payroll, but I don't want my staff doing it. Heck, I don't even want my bookkeeper doing my payroll. Why? Because payroll is complicated, it's cumbersome, the liability is high, and if you ever screw it up on the employee side, trust me, they'll never forgive you. That's why I use Easy Checks Caribbean. They make payroll easy, painless, and trouble-free. Here's how it works. My assistant gives Easy Checks the hours, And that's it. That's all we do. And then the next week, our employees receive their checks, or most of them just receive their direct deposit, and that's it. The taxes, the compliance, the disbursements, the quarterly tax filings. We just give them the hours, and that's it. I love Easy Checks. Visit easycheckspr.com or call 787-379-0241. Mention the broadcast, and the first 3 months are on the house. Whether you have one employee or 1,000, Easy Checks Caribbean, making payroll easy for businesses across Puerto Rico. And we're back with former Secretary of Economic Development, Tito Colorado. And Tito, we were talking about Operation Bootstrap. So tell us about Operation Bootstrap, when it started and the impact that it had and what it did.
It started in the 40s, I would say, for maybe 1942, 1943. Munoz is elected as President of the Senate in 1940. And then he started working on that program. One of the first things he did was to establish operations in Puerto Rico owned by the government in areas where we needed those products.
Okay.
Like bricks, for example, cement, other electricity, and then water resources. All of those things were taken by the government, those that were not already part of the government, and they were developed, bringing some of the top people in the world to work with us and help us in all of those projects. Later on, I would say probably 5 or 6 years later, the Munoz understood that it was not really practical for the government to own such facilities. And some of them, like for example cement and bricks and all of those, were sold to other people. One of the cement company was sold to the Ferré family, who later on, Don Luis Ferré, was governor of Puerto Rico under the New Progressive Party for statehood. He was governor after Munoz, and then Rafael Hernandez Colon later after him. But at that time, Rafael was president of the party, and Luis Ferré won the election. That was 1968-69, and then he became governor for 4 years. But the program continued. See, the program of tax benefits that was established in 1948, I said before, the governor, Luis Ferré, kept it going.
And it grew? More
it continued to grow. But it started, as I said, in 1948. From 1948 to 1968, there were no changes.
Okay.
There was, new legislation, but basically the same concept of tax benefits to manufacturers. Now, when Luis Ferré came as governor, I was working in the government. I stayed in government for 3 months while he was governor. And the then administrator of economic development wanted me to stay, but I said, I'm an attorney, so I want to practice, so let me do something else. Really, it was not easy to be with the government, although I got along with the governor, obviously, and with the secretary at that time, but I thought it was better for me to go out. But I continued to work in economic development for a long, until now. But Don Luis Ferré didn't change anything, and it was very important that not only that, the law was being changed was being reapproved, I would say, every 10 years. So when he came in, it was about 9 years. There were 1 year left for him to do it. He didn't do that. Immediately, he said, just to make sure that everybody knows that I'm going to continue the program the way it is, I'm going to approve the legislation 1 year before, so that will last 10 years from then. And he did that, and we helped him, and everything continued the same way. Then Rafael Hernandez Colon became governor after Don Luis, and Rafael was governor for 4 years. So the same legislation continued, and that was Ferrez legislation continued to be the principal to attract companies to Puerto Rico. Then, after Rafael, came Carlos Romero. Carlos Romero was 8 years as governor. He didn't change the law.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, he approved one law which did the same, basically. Then Rafael became governor again. Then I became in charge of economic development, not as working there, but as secretary, as administrator at that time. And we were there for 8 years. So we're saying from 1948 to 1992, there were no changes.
Okay.
Basic changes.
And until
then it changed.
Okay. So what were the tax incentives until then?
Okay, the tax incentives, there were other incentives. I mean, PRITCO, which was Puerto Rico Industrial Development Company, at that time, it was a corporation, a public corporation. And PRITCO would give many other benefits. Tax exemption was number one. At the beginning, it was 100%. Later on, it was, reduced somewhat, but not much.
And back then was the idea, if you were manufacturing in Puerto Rico and you kept your money in Puerto Rico, then you were not taxed.
No, you were not taxed or taxed on the dividends, but very little.
Okay.
But the thing is that in 1966, I mean before I came in, they changed the federal law from what was Section 931 to Section 936. And 936 was different because under 931, monies were being kept somewhere outside the United States and mainly outside of Puerto Rico also.
Okay.
Why? Because when they finished their tax benefits, that at that time were 10 years,
10 years.
When they finished the tax benefits, they had to take all of the money back to the United States, close the corporation in Puerto Rico, and they would pay no taxes.
Okay.
But
you guys didn't want them closing the corporations.
But the problem, well,
Yeah.
it was a problem for the companies because they would have to start a new corporation.
Yeah.
See, so that didn't make much
A little
sense.
impractical.
So what the federal government did with Section 936 was, okay, if you keep the money in Puerto Rico or in the United States, you don't have to pay taxes in Puerto Rico, basically. I'm sorry, in Puerto Rico, not outside of Puerto Rico and outside of the United States. You could take the money to the United States, and then you just received it and paid a very small tax. And then later on, or you could keep it in Puerto Rico. Now, we established a program with the acceptance of the U.S. government, whereby if you kept the money in Puerto Rico a number of years,
right,
the tax that you would have had to pay, which we call the toll gate tax, would have to be paid less and less and less. And if you had 10 years, then you didn't have to pay anything.
Right.
So that meant that we had money in Puerto Rico at very low interest. Why low interest? Because if they didn't pay taxes on the interest, then they could give a lower rate on the money that was lent to someone.
Sure.
So that helped Puerto Rico a lot.
Yeah, there were what, 12 banks here, I think.
No, we had more than 12 banks.
12.
Yeah, we had,
and I think I heard a number like the banks, like 40% of all that money they had was
here.
It was and it was 931 money.
Was here. It was 936.
931
was before. At that time was 936.
Was 936 the one for medical manufacturing?
No, 936 and 931 were basically the same
thing.
The changes were what I just mentioned.
Right, not having to start a new corporation.
Not having to close the corporation, not having to pay income and be able to take the money to the mainland before they had to close their operation.
I understand. So 936 created that. And was it just for drug manufacturing or was it for any type of manufacturing?
It was any type of manufacturing, especially, some products that were being manufactured in Puerto Rico would not qualify.
Okay.
but those were very few.
Got it. So it was
There were
most.
very few, so-
But it just happened to have brought a lot of drug manufacturers because it made sense for
Well, we're talking about, Puerto Rico became the showcase of the Caribbean. Puerto Rico was, exporting 30, 40, $50 billion a year in manufactured products all over the world and to the mainland.
and it created about 140,000 jobs.
At one time, we had 169,000 direct jobs. Direct.
Right.
If you take the multiplier effect on that, you would really be talking about 400,000 jobs.
Sure. And so Puerto Rico really exploded. It thrived during those decades, became sort of the crown jewel of Latin America.
Yes.
And then the U.S. government wanted to get rid of, and at this point it was 936, correct? Not 931 anymore.
It was 936 at that time.
Okay. So it morphed into 936, and the U.S. government wanted to take away 936.
But let me put it this way.
Break down the whole
start.
demise of
I get
936.
into the government in 1985, and I get as economic development administrator, now secretary, and I'm asked to help because the federal government at that time, the Treasury Department, had said that they didn't see any benefits in Section 936, that it was costing too much money, and that therefore, they thought it should be eliminated.
And just so I'm clear on that, they're saying that they weren't the U.S. was not benefiting because they weren't collecting taxes. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, my job, immediate job, before my first day of work, the governor told me, okay, I want you in Fomento, but we have this problem, and we have to solve this problem.
And the problem was that the U.S. government wanted to get rid of 936.
The Treasury Department,
right, the Treasury Department
wanted it out.
Okay.
But we were able in those 8 years to convince Congress, to convince the Department of Treasury, to convince the Department of Commerce, to convince the Department of State and the USTR that it benefits the United States and it benefits Puerto Rico. And to do that, we were able to help George Bush and President Reagan in developing the Caribbean Basin Initiative.
So question. So I understand the argument when you're explaining to the Treasury Department, what have you, that it's benefiting Puerto Rico. But how were you explaining to the government that it was benefiting the U.S. mainland?
Well, basically,
and actually, hold that thought 1 second. We've got to go away for a break. 1 sec. We'll be right back in just a moment with Tito Colorado. Don't go away. I want to take a quick minute to tell you about an organization that's very near and dear to my heart because I started it. The San Juan Social Club is at its core a community of extraordinary people getting together for food, fun, networking, and philanthropy. What started out a few years ago as a small gathering of friends has blossomed into thousands of entrepreneurs, business owners, movers, shakers, and change makers here in Puerto Rico. We hold monthly free social, learning, and community service events. We run an annual networking cruise, which is truly an unforgettable experience. Plus, we just started securing member exclusives on things like discounts for professional services, restaurants, and service businesses on the island and beyond. If you spend any time at all in Puerto Rico, we'd love to see you at our next event. Visit sanjuansocialclub.org to get on the invite list. Again, that's sanjuansocialclub.org. Hope to see you at our next event. I'd like to share a very cool opportunity with you. Now, do keep in mind this isn't investment advice. You should always consult a professional before investing. I want to tell you about Mondax Group. Mondax provides alternative asset management and retirement solutions. Mondax takes a very patient and rigorous approach to investing, and their mission is to deliver predictable cash flows to their clients backed by strong, high-growth businesses that they invest in. Their private offering, the Axe Axel Fund is for reserved accredited investors only and pays out a whopping 16% dividend distributed monthly. The fund's underlying assets are independent trucking businesses contracted across the U.S. with a Fortune 50 company. So if you're interested in learning how you, as an accredited investor, can earn 16% potentially tax-free, give Jason Schur a call at 609-937-8064. He'd love to schedule a complimentary face-to-face lunch to show you all the details. For more info, you can visit mondaxgroup.com/Axel-Fund. And we're back with former Secretary of Economic Development, Tito Colorado. This is fascinating. I love history, and I love the history of Puerto Rico. So please continue. We were talking about making the argument to the states that it was good for the U.S. to keep 936.
I went to several times, even after I left government and before the changes. I went to Congress and I spoke in the different committees, and I told them, you're not going to get 1 cent out of it. It's not going to work that way. They're going to go somewhere else.
Right, I understand. Okay, so they'll go to, which they ended up doing in the end, right? So they go to the DR and what have you, and then you've got nothing.
Many years later,
Of course.
I met
exactly
with
what happened.
Charlie Rangel, who's a good friend, congressman from New York, and he was the Ways and Means Committee chairman twice. And I told him, Charlie, what happened? Did you get anything? You didn't get anything. I told you. It was not going to work. You hurt Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And
time.
it didn't help the United States at all.
Right.
And Puerto Rico is the United States.
It is.
So you hurt part of the United States without really doing anything that would benefit either statehood, because it didn't at all,
Right.
or Puerto Rico's economic growth. And then the companies that had worked very close with me to be able to keep, not only keep 936, make 936 an instrument for the United States to get some tax information exchange agreements that they wanted. And I did that during those 8 years. But not only that, but I told them you didn't get any money. And that is what happened.
Right. So let's talk about what happens. So now the U.S. government, finally says, hey, we really want to close up 936. And
the government of Puerto Rico agreed.
That's the thing. So the government of Puerto Rico could have said, no, but they said, sure.
We have no problem. That's what they said.
And why did all that happen? Explain.
I'll tell you why.
Let's break it down.
First, it became a status issue, not a political issue, more than a status issue, which it really wasn't. And it still is not. Why? If you want to become a state, you want to have the strongest economy that you can to show the United States that you can become a state.
Yeah.
See?
That you can.
So if you want to do that, you use the instruments that you have now. You may lose them later, but if you grow to certain standards, you may not have to need tax exemption. I wish we didn't need tax exemption.
Sure.
But even New York State grants tax exemption.
Right.
So that's a reality. Cuba grants tax exemption.
Too, yeah.
Nicaragua grants tax exemption.
Right.
Costa Rica grants full tax exemption to any American that moves there and retires there. Yeah. Portugal does the same. So, it didn't make any sense for those believing in statehood.
What was the rationale?
To take it away.
What was the rationale? How did they think that it would not cripple or seriously injure Puerto Rico?
Well, they had, spokesman at that time, Carlos Romero, who had been governor, had not changed it. Mm-hmm. But then he was in Congress. And then he was telling the government, the governor Rosselló, that, we don't need that. If we want to become a state, we cannot have instruments that are not viable under statehood.
I see.
Therefore, he thought, that statehood was for the poor. But, the way I see it, it was for the poor, but it really was not.
Yeah.
And now, what happened? At that time, the government sort of separated from the 936 companies in the way that the organization that had been established when Romero was governor, which was the Puerto Rico USA Foundation, was not cohesive anymore. They were not working together. So when the industry saw that the governor and the government of Puerto Rico were not trying to get something that was good for them, they made a deal with the federal government. They made a deal with Congress, and the Congress granted them 10 years of a grandfather clause. So they said, okay, we'll eliminate 936, but you will have 10 years. So that was good enough for them. And that's why many of them left Puerto Rico.
So they cut 936. This I didn't know. So when they cut 936, though, they still gave the companies that were here utilizing 936, they gave them another decade.
So that's why the slowdown didn't come immediately.
Right.
No new companies were coming,
Right.
but the old ones were still staying.
Here.
So slowly they left, and after the 10 years, which we hadn't grown at all, then we really came down in the last years after they lost what they had.
And Puerto Rico was going like this, and arguably that was the most crippling decision that Puerto Rico made, wasn't it?
Yeah, you know, when I left government, 1992, 93, everything had worked fine, and we had no problem. But then we changed from a Republican government. Amazingly, you know, I'm a Democrat, but nevertheless, we were dealing much better with a Republican government at that time. Then Clinton comes into power. He starts talking about workfare, not welfare. So I was very happy for that. You know?
Sure.
And I thought, you know, this was going to change. And then he said, well, I want to get rid of special benefits. And he didn't get rid of any of them except the one that we gave him.
And then he instituted NAFTA, right? Didn't he bring it?
And then NAFTA, yes, NAFTA was, you know, the agreement with Canada, and then later on
Mexico.
with Mexico. And then after Clinton, we started working with the Caribbean, Central America treaty, which includes all of Central America and the Dominican Republic. We participated also in that. I participated in those agreements. But the thing is that obviously the type of agreement or tax treaty with the countries close to us, like Mexico, Canada, and then all of Central America, was important to Puerto Rico. It gave the market that Puerto Rico had other markets, which, I mean, other countries that could have the same benefit, not exactly the same, but partially. And obviously, many of the companies that could not be any longer in Puerto Rico were going to other places. As a matter of fact, during those years, we established what it was known as the twin plant agreements. And twin plant agreements were where we would help companies to do part of their work in Puerto Rico, the basic work in Puerto Rico, and then do some work outside in any of the other countries of the Caribbean and Central America. That was before the treaty. And therefore, you know, we showed that we could work with the Caribbean countries for the benefit of the United States. They wanted, as I mentioned before, and I think it was important, the government wanted some tax information, which were banking, really, agreements, so that they could know where the American citizens were keeping their money. And vice versa, that would give the same benefit to those countries. Well, I was able to get 8 of those treaties for the United States. I don't think in the history of the United States, anyone outside of the government did that for the U.S. Wow. So we were working as closely as you can get to the United States government as partners. We were helping them at the same time we were helping the Caribbean, and we were helping ourselves. Now, when all of that changed, the thing is that we had nothing to do with the Caribbean. We have had nothing to do with Central America. And now we're talking about bringing too close to the United States products like chips and other products that we could be manufacturing here. Puerto Rico should be really sort of directing this program. We have the experience. We did it before, and it did work really, for the benefit of the United States and Puerto Rico. The economy in Puerto Rico grew more than 20%. The manufacturing plants from outside of Puerto Rico grew more than 20%, and the local industry grew more than 20%. And we had about, I don't know how many thousands of new jobs until 1992, and then even until 1995. But then the change was made in 1995.
And when that finally happened, what happened in Puerto Rico? What was the effect?
Well, the thing is, first, I believe that the governments have not realized there have been changes of government every 4 years.
Right.
So it's very difficult if every time one party comes in, he wants to change the legislation. The problem we have is you don't have certainty.
Right.
One of the most important things to have economic development, more important than the benefits, is the certainty that what you have will be there.
And by the way, is that why some of the private-public partnerships are created, like Invest Puerto Rico? Because as you have, changes politically, you still have a cohesive line that continues on.
Yes, that is the idea.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's not perfect.
But it will not work if, these two organizations have been established by the PNP government.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the only thing you have to realize as a government or as a people is that must have continuity. To have continuity, it cannot belong to one party or the other.
Mm.
So you have to make sure that the boards are established with the participation and appointed by not only one governor or not only two governors, appointed for so date, and then that it be approved, I don't know, by...
Does Puerto Rico do that or no?
No, I don't think it has done that yet. And then you see the same, this organization to a certain extent, looking more at the government to see what they do than doing what they should be doing.
So this is kind of like in the States, like bipartisanism.
You need bipartisanism.
Yeah.
If not, especially when you're changing the government every 4 years, it will not work. So I tell both PNPs and Populares, you have to work together. You have some things that are different, perfect.
Yeah.
You have new ideas, great, but we have to work together.
Right.
It's the only way to get the certainty that we had from 1948 to 1995.
There you go. Well, we've run out of time. Tito, I feel like we have so much more to cover. Will you come back on the show?
Whenever you say.
Okay.
If I'm here.
Okay, so then
wherever I am.
We're going to do that because this was really interesting. My guest, Tito Colorado, former Secretary of Economic Development to Puerto Rico. And if you're enjoying the Puerto Rico Business Broadcast, make sure to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. And until next time, this is Daven Michaels. Live your true life adventure. We'll see you soon.